Thank you very much for staying with us here on the Joy News channel. This is the day, as they say, that not only say the Lord had made, but in this case, is the Public Financial Management Act that has made this day possible, because the Finance Minister has left it to the very last day, beyond which it now borders on pure illegality, because the law has circumscribed when the mid-year budget should be presented, not later than the 31st of July, which is today, after many postponements, and that in itself has generated a fair bit of controversy on the floor of Parliament. So welcome. By the end of today, we will have a mid-year budget presented to the House. A lot of unprecedented things have happened leading into this. One, the Finance Minister had decided that before he presented the budget, he will meet the entire House behind closed doors and give them some briefings. And he can take some questions. That has happened already. We're beginning to learn a bit more from that meeting. Of course, that he will not be asking for more money to spend in the rest of the year that is remaining on the back of the 2023 budget. But also, why is this important? It is important because since the last budget was read, we've had an agreement with the IMF and we put together a program. Many looking forward to see how that finds expression fully in this particular budget that is about to be presented, a mid-year budget review. There is also a lot of expectation about expenditure cuts, considering where we are right now. Remember, we have 600 million already in accounts from the IMF. We're expecting more this year. Our ability to qualify for that will be determined largely by what the government does in the interim. And this budget will give us a clear indication how they are performing and what they plan to do to qualify for the next disbursement indeed. And so there's a lot riding on this mid-year budget review. It is not business as usual. It shouldn't be. And that's why many are looking forward to it. So join our coverage right now. And I'm grateful that you're spending time with us. In the studio with me is Winston Amoah. He is a tax partner at Deloitte Ghana. Thank you very much, Gideon, for joining us in the studio. And of course with me is our in-house tax and budget expert. You don't know him with that kind of credentials because normally I'll be introducing him as my deputy on the political desk, but that's what he is. What's the smack on your face?
Budget analyst. Oh, like that one.
Oh, you don't like the tax one?
No.
Okay, no problem. So I withdraw the tax one.
You know there's a tax man.
Oh, so, okay, you don't want me to go there. Okay, no problem. So I withdraw the tax one and I hand you fully the budget analyst bit. Okay, great. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. As I was saying, first, let's lay the foundations. Why is this important? Why is this not a usual, everyday mid-year budget review that we anticipate with no much excitement? Because either he's coming to ask for more money to spend or he's just coming to tell us what he's done over the last, 6 months. Why is this one different?
Well, Evans, in the introduction, you started by talking about it. So this is the first mid-year post the IMF program. We got the program in May. Of course, we can always argue that even before the staff level agreement in December 2022, a lot of the things, we had in the 2023 budget, were done with the consent of the IMF. And that's why you'd realize that a lot of our preconditions, the revenue measures that we put in place, were done post the presentation of the budget. And those were the things that actually culminated even in the staff level agreement. But now, having gotten into an IMF program, there will be a review in September. The real deal is, what is the state of your economy? All the things that you said you're going to do. And mind you, our program was hinged mostly on revenue mobilization. Yes, you had expenditure cuts, but it was mainly hinged on revenue mobilization. So it will be important for us to see, for instance, whether we're achieving all the targets that we set for ourselves. The growth and sustainability, tax that we brought in place. Is it achieving the targets that we set for it? When it even comes to taxes at the ports, for instance, yes, we're talking about having a trade surplus, but the reality is that is it a case that people are not importing as they would today, also because of the challenges that we are faced with the Ghanaian economy? If that's the case, how's that impacting revenue in itself? And will the finance minister be, cutting down expenditure? If they decide not to cut down expenditure, and if revenue is not matching the, levels that we expect it to be, what would that mean for us as a country? Mind you, you are at a point where you're shut out of the international capital market. So you're looking within. Now, if you continue to look within, what would that in itself mean for the Ghanaian private sector and by extension, the Ghanaian economy. So there's a lot to find out within the next 2 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your own thoughts on why this is important?
Yeah, I largely agree with a lot of the ideas, his perspective he shared. So for me as a tax consultant, to what extent is fiscal policy assisting or aiding government to achieve economic growth? We want to grow out of this current situation that we find ourselves in. So we've all seen all the various tax increments, VAT, additional taxes, excise taxes coming on and so on and so forth. So I want to see what government view. They have all the figures. They have much more details than I do. But to what extent is it helping them to achieve their economic growth? Is it the fact that they need to review some of these taxes? We've heard some rumors that some taxes might go up. I don't know how far this is true, but a lot of the sentiments that the business community has also been sharing is that will taxes ever go down? Some of this VAT, or should there be some targeted areas of the economy that government could see? Well, I think this area needs a reprieve. We all know the manufacturing sector is suffering a lot as a result of these additional taxes. So for me, I'm looking at what government views this area, even if not for the immediate review that is coming up today. We know there's an IMF review coming in September, and then budget for next year, much more critically, will come up by November. What other changes would I think we'll get inklings of it from this?
Yeah, and there's something you said. I want to quickly start there because you cannot ignore the fact that one of the key things that makes it important to mention is the IMF program. Yeah. When the presentation was being done of the 2023 budget, we were just about getting the staff level agreement, and so the IMF team was here. You expect that they played a significant role in that, but since then this is now crystallized. You mentioned the next review is in September, based on which we either get the next tranche or we don't. This budget will tell us a bit more about that, give us an indication of the rest of what government plans to do and what they've done over the last 6 months to qualify for that. Because September is just what? August, September, 2 months away, right?
31 days away.
Exactly. So really around the corner. So a lot is riding on this budget on the back of that. And that is why this is also very critical. Let's focus and zoom in on the IMF injunctions that will have to, clearly state in this mid-year budget and get Parliament to approve. Isn't that critical? That's, I bet, even more critical than anything else, because this will give us a clearer path to the September, whether the review is positive or negative.
It is, Evans, and it's one of the reasons, when I started, I talked about even our revenue projections. Because if you go for a program that is hinged on revenue mobilization, so for instance, I'm looking at it, and I just picked, petroleum receipts for 2023, and I look at the fact that, okay, so we projected that, our figure for analysis was $88 per barrel. Today, it's hovering around $80 to $84 per barrel. In the large part of 2023, it's been around 73, for instance. 73 to 76 to 79, for instance. What does that mean for us? If you look into the budget also, you'd recognize that, even when it comes to our projection, when it comes to, VAT at the ports, NHL at the ports, all of these are based on imports. It will be important for me today to know, for instance, how the imports are doing. If the imports are not doing well, and we're currently talking about having a trade surplus, which means that we're exporting more than we're importing. Ordinarily, you would say that is a good thing because you expect that to even translate into a stronger currency, domestic currency. Unfortunately for us, that's not what we're saying. I don't want to go into that. It's a conversation for another day. But you want to find out when it comes to the direct taxes, the indirect taxes, how are we doing? Because if we don't do well, and this is a fact, see, if the finance minister were picking indications that he may not, be introducing new revenue measures, what that would mean is that we have to enhance the existing measures. One of the things we've not been very good at achieving as a country is that whenever we've had a conversation about widening the tax net, we've never been able to do that. And so what we have done is to consistently get the very same that are paying to be burdened with paying for more. I would want to know, for instance, if the finance minister is not introducing any new revenue measures, what are the measures being put in place to expand the net? What would be new from what we have known and what we have discussed over the period? Look, we talked about having today a lot of Ghanaians having tax identification number by virtue of a conversion of one's Ghana card to a tax identification number. What would that have made? I mean, what has that translated into by way of payment of taxes, for instance? Okay, here you are with a total revenue of 143 billion, with a total expenditure of about 222 billion. If I add amortization and arrears, I know that in a lot of the times we take that away and talk about 190, but I'm just adding the amortization and arrears. Okay, that in itself gives you a deficit of over 80 billion. How are you going to fund that? It's instructive. Are you going to continuously fund that with the treasury bills that we're using currently? That in itself has an impact on the economy. So it's the reason government would have to look at other sources. And the best source here available to government is if government can increase revenue through compliance, and two, if government can cut down a lot of the expenditure. Now, by the time we saw the IMF program, we had indicated a lot of the programs were subject to review. What is the review of, and what's the outcome of these reviews? It will be important for us to know. Now, Agenda 111, which was supposed to have been completed, by end of 2023, has been extended to by end of 2027. What are the savings from there? It's important to know all of these things, because if all of these things don't really show a positive outcome, then I am sorry, we would have to go for new revenue measures. And for me, that would be suicidal for us.
And Gideon, also now that we know that the finance minister is not going to be asking for supplementary budget, asking for fresh money to spend, in meeting the IMF restrictions, he will definitely then have to do a number of things, either introduce, fresh taxes, review existing ones to make them more efficient, or cut expenditure. Where do you think he will lean?
This is a very difficult...
or where should he lean?
Okay, so the thing is, he talked about tax collection. We are also talking about revenue. Ghana has been shut out from the international market for now, so we have to look inwards. So realistically, he also has to look at both areas, revenue as well as expenditure. Of course, tax collection also tells you about the health of the economy. If the amount of revenue government had estimated at the beginning of the year, they're not getting it, it shows you that something is wrong because taxes are very high. Economists will always tell you there's something at the point on the Laffer curve beyond which you increase, the revenue is not going to decrease, or so on and so forth. So government really has to look at both sides as of now. I want to see what information the minister is coming to present in terms of the estimates they had. We all know E-levy is not bringing as much projection as the government wanted. But what of the other areas, the growth and sustainability levy, for example, and all the other tax measures that they put in place? I know GRA has done a lot in terms of the compliance areas, especially the e-invoicing area, which has really rigged in a lot of revenue. So I want to see how much revenue has brought in yet. If it hasn't brought in yet, then what else does government need to do? Should it still continue to raise tax rates? Because there's a level at which government raises the tax rates, which really isn't going to bring in additional revenue. Of course, we talk about it's like a pyramid. And so the rates, the higher the rates, and then because the base is very low. If the base is very high, the rates can also drop at this time. So I'm very much going to look at the revenue figures that government has projected and whether they are bang on in those areas. Because that could tell me what the IMF review in September is going to come up with. And whether the IMF is going to say, we think you need to do more, or still continue to cut more areas. Mind the IMF is saying they have the vulnerable in mind. They are not going to cut expenditure in certain areas. And in Ghana here, we know government is a major player, major spender in the economy. So if you cut government expenditure too much, it's going to slow down the economy. And we don't want that to happen. So there should be certain untouchable areas. Of course, we'll talk about infrastructure and other areas which spurs economic growth. Those areas we don't have to touch. But other ones where we think they are not part of the productive sectors of the economy, government should be looking at cutting expenditure.
So you believe the right approach is to cut expenditure. There's no room for fresh taxes.
So I'll share with you. So Deloitte did a survey and where we asked over 300 companies what their views or expectations, what's at the top of their mind, what's affecting them. And they came up with so many areas. Part of it is high tax rates. It was a major area where respondents said they don't expect taxes to increase. So if government were to increase tax in these areas, it will be a major area for them, and then it will be a major border or headache for a lot of the taxpayers.
But businesses will always say that. Businesses will always. I don't think you can ever go to a business and say you are expecting new taxes. Oh yeah, give us new taxes. Businesses will always say that.
But Evans, the challenge is that if businesses, businesses would always say that you expect businesses to also make profit and pay you CIT, corporate income tax, and pay you income taxes. Now, if companies are not making enough profit, if they're complaining that the taxes are choking them and thus they can't make enough profit, that would also affect, in the end, your revenue projections. One of the reasons we reduce, income taxes is that sometimes we believe that if we reduce them, for instance, once companies put them back into the business and they expand, they grow, they even get to pay more. Okay, and that's the idea behind it. But if today you're actually choking companies, then they begin to find creative ways of dodging the payment of taxes.
Yeah.
And that's not what you want when you're a country that finds itself in the kind of situation we are. And for me, look, in 2022, for instance, we had a capital expenditure of 13 billion. I don't see why today we're talking about a capital expenditure of 27 billion. I don't see it.
Yeah.
Okay, and if you want to cut down expenditure, you have to look at the discretionary expenditure, of which capital expenditure is key. Okay, so you could actually look at that and say, how about I reduce that? If you had 13 billion, how about taking it to, say, 15 or 18 billion? And so you can actually, take away some 9 to 10 billion Ghana cedis off that. You're looking at your goods and services budget. You look at it and say, which areas can I, take a bit off? Okay, that's something that you can do. Now, when we sent our letter of intent to the IMF, there are a lot of things we talked about. We had reduced, fuel coupons to ministers. We had cut down on salaries by 30% and all of that. For me, I've said this before and I repeat this. Let's quantify that, put that in a figure and see how much of that are savings to the state. As it stands now, you and I cannot afford new taxes. And that's the reality. If you look at everything happening within the country, if you look at the rate of inflation, if you look at lending rates and everything, if you even look at the rate of depreciation today, the last thing you want on your plate is new revenue measures. In fact, the first thing you want are a relaxation of some of the revenue measures or scrapping of some of the revenue measures. And that's why I agreed, for instance, when, when GUTA, Ghana National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, were making a point that, the COVID-19 levy, for instance, be removed. Look, today we're saying that the e-levy is not really bringing in enough. We're looking at an e-levy that's expected to generate some 2.5 billion Ghana cedis. If it is still struggling, is it about time that we took a second look at that whole, revenue measure? Because it still would look like, even though there's been, plans and everything and measures trying to curb, non-payment, people are still allowing cash out and not paying. So if it is not working, the few that are paying, could you just take it off them and say, look, you know what, it's enough, go. And that's the end of it. A lot of things would have to be done. I just want to see, and that's why I say I just would want to wait patiently and see what the finance minister is going to be saying. Of course, all of this is hinged on the targets and where we are today. Based on all the targets that we set for ourselves, where have we reached with the targets? Are we achieving it? Are we close to achieving it? Of course, we know that the third and fourth quarter are always our best, quarters when it comes to revenue generation. So we can actually look at that, compare that to previous years, and indicate percentage-wise where we are today and whether it's likely that we'd achieve it. If it's not, well, expenditure cuts is the way to go.
Yeah, because if you look at what government themselves submitted to the IMF, which was the basis for the program, they had committed to do comprehensive public expenditure review, undertaken with the World Bank. What that is, we'll get to learn today. What is comprehensive expenditure review? Everybody's expecting that they will announce further cuts in government expenditure. Many have said at the beginning of this, reduce the size of government, take out a bit of more ministries, downsize, that will save you a bit more. We'll see whether that happens. Many do not expect cuts in the size of government, by the way. So where else in government are they going to cut? That'll be interesting to look for in the budget. Also, they also look at the statutory funds, whose spending could not be efficiently undertaken by their respective MMDAs will also be phased out. And so that's a significant one that we're also looking forward to. And then they're talking about the flagship programs. And for me, this is the key one, and we should spend some time talking about this, that they'll review the 1D, 1V1, 1D as a one village, one dam, the one district, one warehouse, and infrastructure for poverty alleviation project as a IPEP will be reviewed and streamlined also. A lot of the money goes into these areas, and maybe that offers clarity on where they want to cut, Winston. Some of these projects, they've committed in the agreement with the IMF to review them. What review means in real sense, we don't know. We didn't see that in the 2023 budget. But we certainly must see it in this mid-year budget review, what the streamlined, reviewed flagship programs look like.
Yeah.
Have they reduced the numbers? If you look at, and you're right, if you look at the Agenda 111, it was reviewed, but that period was extended to 2027. So what do you expect they will do to the one village, one dam, one district, one warehouse, infrastructure for poverty alleviation program? Should they reduce the coverage, for example? So if the one village, one dam says every village in the north must have a dam, are you going to review it to say, well, based on what we built so far, we are not extending them? That's one possibility. One district, one warehouse. I mean, there are 200 and what? 16 districts. Is that suggesting that you want to have a warehouse in all 216 of them? Are you now going to tell us, for example, in the media budget, that instead of 216, we can only do 100? I mean, so there's a lot in terms of specifics that we're expecting now. Bare bones, but this will put a flesh on them.
Yes, exactly. And look, this is the point. Today, let's be very honest with ourselves. And I think I saw a motion in Parliament last week or so, actually, removing tax exemptions for, companies under the one district, one factory. And, one of the concerns we've had over the period is also about, these tax exemptions. And we've talked about the losses to the state. So that's one point. Now, if you are a country that is seeking a bailout, you'd ask yourself the very simple question. Do I today need to be building 111 hospitals? 111 hospitals in districts where I say they do not have hospitals, where if we were to do the analysis, for instance, we probably would come to the conclusion that in some of the districts, the current facilities there are serving the interest, and so I don't need to be putting up a district hospital in that particular area. And so you extend it from 2022 to say 2027. But the reality is, do you need them? So for where we've not started, for instance, we put a hold on it, we put a freeze on them and say, you know what? Okay, for areas where we've started, because some have had challenges with land and all of that, for those areas where we haven't started, we're not going to continue. It doesn't hurt. Because, you see, you are under austere times, and the realization is key. You've talked about the vulnerable, and that's where, for me, the major concern is, and I'll tell you why. Look, Gideon here was reminding me that, well, that's 2024, next year is an election year. It is actually the reason we must look at government expenditure when it comes to pro-poor policies. Because the IMF program is such that while targeting and strengthening of our macroeconomic indicators and everything, it still says the policies should not affect the poor. And so we should put in place pro-poor policies to actually improve the conditions of the poor. And that, for me, is where the problem could be. And so today we could be telling you that we're targeting a lot of pro-poor policies, but that becomes avenue for us, for instance, to be able to pursue election-related expenditure. And that's where the concern is. So yes, we want to, put in place pro-poor measures. We're told about how over 800,000 people have sunk into, the poverty line. But Evans, free SHS, we're told that everything was going to be reviewed. I know they're not going to touch free SHS, so I'm not going to go there. It's obvious that the infrastructure for poverty eradication program has not helped as much as is expected to. There's something we've talked about over and over, so I don't want to talk about it again. Things about, blocking leakages, that's something I don't want to talk about again. So come out there, show me, like we say, show me how much you want to cut, so that by end of year when you're presenting the budget, I would check to see whether you were able to do it. I'm not going to suggest to you that let's, block leakages, block the wastage, because we've said this over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, Gideon, I'll come to you for your thoughts on this very important subject, but I want to take us to Parliament, where my colleague George Uafe is standing by, just giving us a sense of when we can expect the Finance Minister to start the presentation. George is joining us right now. George, do we have any clarity yet when the Finance Minister will step into the House and begin the presentation?
The minister might not be able to present the budget. When I tried to engage officials of the Ministry of Finance a while ago, they told me that they are ready and they are waiting for Parliament's permission to let the minister come in and do the presentation.
To give us that brief again, because we lost you at the beginning. What is it that your sources are telling you as far as the presentation is concerned, and when we can expect that to start?
Well, Evans, I mean, as we stand right now, we are waiting for a program that is already happening in Parliament to conclude, for the minister to come in. When I engaged the officials of the Ministry of Finance a while ago, they told me the minister has been ready and is waiting for the Parliament's approval or Parliament's permission for him to come in and give us the presentation. But I also have with me Kweku, our colleague in Parliament here. And Kweku, what have you also been picking from the ministry side or from the government side? You get the understanding that they are ready, waiting for Parliament to give them the permission for the minister to come in. I've seen the officials already here. What are you also picking up, engaging your persons or your sources from the speaker's side?
Indeed, that's exactly so. In fact, there are MPs who are concerned that today of all days, the Speaker of Parliament decided to fix what he called the inauguration of the Citizens Bureau. So that event has just ended. The Speaker of Parliament has commissioned what will be called the Citizens Bureau here in Parliament to serve as a link between civil society organizations, members of Parliament, as well as the general public. So that event has ended. The Speaker has just gone into his lobby, and we expect that very soon the Finance Minister will come in and do the presentation. That has been the only thing outstanding. The Speaker of Parliament had communicated 10 a.m. to the Minister. His team, members of Parliament, were all ready by the time. In fact, I could confirm that very senior members from the Ministry of Finance had already arrived here at 10 o'clock a.m., expecting that the business will proceed for them to do that. But because of the Citizens Bureau inauguration, that could not happen. And so now the Speaker of Parliament has gone to his lobby. The Finance Ministry are going to meet him. They're going to have some pre-sitting conversations. They will come in. So every moment from now, as you can see from the floor, very bustling with activities. We expect that the Finance Ministry will come in, they will do a few corrections of the votes and proceedings, then they will get right to the business for today, the media.
Interesting, before even events come in, I mean, I remember I've engaged some members of Parliament, even at the Minority Caucus, and they appear not to be happy with this event happening on a day that the Minister of Finance is supposed to present this media review of budget estimates.
Definitely. In fact, my understanding at the time was that it was only the majority who were not happy. But later, when I checked in with the minority MPs themselves, some of them were not happy. In fact, if you look at the attendance at the Citizens Bureau, very little, very negligible in terms of the MPs who went there, clearly expressing their distaste over that arrangement. Some of them telling me off the record that the Speaker of Parliament could have moved this event to tomorrow or any other day after the business from the media budget review is concluded. But the Speaker of Parliament insisted that he had made all arrangements already, and he expected that this event would have concluded today. But that event was also expected to start at 8:30 a.m., conclude by 10 for this. It didn't start. In fact, almost 10 o'clock a.m. before the Speaker of Parliament and his entourage came in for that event to start, dragging this event till almost midday, and the media budget review has still not started. So the concerns are that the Parliament of Ghana must realign its priorities. If you've said today for media budget review, and I presume that that is going to be the only business for today in the House itself, you don't go about organizing other events which is going to delay this. And then, you know how people think and how people say a lot of things in Ghana, they're probably going to put the blame on the Finance Ministry, going to say that the minister probably came in late. And so those are the concerns that I must say. It's bipartisan. MPs from both the minority and majority clearly not excited that that event has happened. But it has ended, and we expect that the Speaker of Parliament will now come in for the Minister to do his presentation.
Parliament is supposed to go on recess this Friday. What would this also mean for other subsequent business that this House is supposed to do before they write? They're supposed to actually debate this presentation. What will be the implications on this, as well as other bills that are supposed to be passed or reviewed or looked at before they go on recess, maybe Thursday, right?
Thursday, actually, yes. So what this will mean is that the debate on the mid-year budget review is going to be short. In fact, last week when the business statement was presented, the idea is that leadership and ranking members would debate the statement for 15 minutes each, and all other MPs would debate it for 10 minutes. And they are going to do so today, tomorrow, Wednesday, and then Thursday before they go. But mind you, there are also very critical bills on the agenda. The anti-gay bill is there. There are a number of key bills that government has put in place that they have to deal with. And that is why some MPs are also not excited that the Speaker of Parliament asked Parliament not to sit last week, Thursday, to attend a certain national development conference organized by the Church of Pentecost. So that concern has been raised. And so Parliament is going to race against time. What this means is that Parliament is going to do what they call extended sittings. They are going to sit deep into the night every now and then from now till Thursday. Today, normally when the mid-year budget review is presented, they will adjourn. So from tomorrow, Parliament is going to adjourn after 9, after 10, after 9, after 10. In fact, on Thursday itself, they are probably going to adjourn dawn Friday. That is, if the finance minister asks for more money, that would even extend for a longer period. But the indication is that that is not going to come. And so there are real questions about the priorities of the Speaker himself and the kind of decision leadership on both sides have taken, which is probably going to stretch MPs a little from now to Thursday when they adjourn and go on break sitting.
So, Evans, if you don't have any question for us, this is our update coming to you from Parliament House as we await the Minister of Finance to give us the mid-year review of the 2023 budget estimates. Just like what you've heard from Kweku, there are strong indications that he would not be asking for additional funds to spend. That's going to come in the form of supplementary budget. There are again some strong indications that he would not be introducing new taxes as well. And if Evans, we've covered budgets in this house, a mid-year review, where even last-minute things have changed. So if you want to go with what the economists always say, all other things being equal, what we are getting is that there wouldn't be any new taxes. He will stick to the expenditure targets that were set out in the 2023 budget. And the same I also apply for revenue as well. But what we get the minister, he'll be heavy on the IMF program and what he's going to put in place to sustain growth, as well as meet the first review that will happen in September this year. So this is by way of the updates in Parliament. Evans, back to you guys in studio. If you have any question, we're here waiting for you.
Of course. I mean, the bottom line is we don't have clarity yet when exactly he is beginning the presentation. At least that program that the Speaker had put in the calendar today had just ended. And so hopefully in the next 20 minutes or so, that clarity will be delivered. And then we will know when the finance minister is stepping on the floor to deliver that mid-year budget review. All is resting on this. If we are to get the next tranche of the IMF disbursement, we will see this in the mid-year budget review. And let's pick up on the conversation our colleagues there were having on in essence, the IMF program. And George was saying his sources are telling him it will be anchored primarily on this. We expected nothing less. But back to the point, and again, he confirms the point that we started with, which is he's not going to ask for more money. But there are hard targets he must meet. There are revenue targets he must meet. There are expenditure targets he must meet. And IMF will not compromise on that. Before we went for the break, we were talking about what they had committed to review in the program with the IMF. IPEP is one of them. We have budgeted 1.2 billion for IPEP alone, the infrastructure program, implementation program. And that alone is one thing that they put up for the IMF, to the IMF, and say, we'll review, right? You were suggesting earlier, there are some things you can't touch, there's some things you can touch, because you're also committing to the IMF to protect the vulnerable, right? That's a very fine balancing act that they must walk in this particular budget they're about to present.
Yeah, I think for this, you need a good amount of data. And I think the Ministry of Finance are on top of that to be able to make these such decisions. Because if you don't get it right, you rather slow down the economy when we are supposed to add things up. An example is the Agenda 111. And this also has a rippling effect on the economy because these are major projects. They are bringing in goods, they are running the economy, they are employing people, they are paying workers, and then they will have so much effects, value chain along the economy. So for me, there are some areas that are very critical. If we still want to maintain a certain level of growth, we shouldn't touch these areas. Another example or area I want to say that for critical attention is the manufacturing sector. And we know it's much critical. We are hearing stories of lines or businesses shutting down because of high taxes, etc. But I think if there is any sector which has to be targeted, I think the manufacturing sector has to be given some reprieve. Because if they do very well...
So they need more, not less?
They need less taxes.
Okay, that's what you mean. Okay, they need less taxes.
Yeah, they need less
taxes. So don't
taxes.
tax them.
Yes.
But also don't cut from, I guess, initiatives that would provide an enabling environment for them to grow even more.
Especially, and I think one of the areas where...
I guess it's interesting that they one district, one factory is not up for review as part of the IMF program. That is definitely one of the areas that improves manufacturing.
Yes, and that to me is a good thing. I think another example he gave, where last week Parliament was looking at some of the tax exemptions. You know, we have a new Tax Exemptions Act, which has sort of streamlined the processes whereby government gives tax exemptions, and to avoid a lot of this wrongdoings or areas where government gives too much tax exemption and then the state loses out. So with that ongoing, I don't expect that we'll lose a lot of revenue through tax exemptions because of this Tax Exemptions Act. But I expect that a lot of these areas, when it comes in, it should rather spur on growth in the other areas. And it all depends on how government goes about applying some of these tax exemptions to some of these specific areas. So the infrastructure, definitely, I'll add another one, manufacturing. If we do it very well, it will rather spur growth and even affect inflation, because some of them are charging so high prices because they claim energy cost is going up. We know right now the IPPs are government, ECG, etc. Government has to be reviewing the monthly or quarterly prices as part of this IMF agenda. So cost of energy will be going up. If we add high taxes to it, it will have a negative effect, and inflation will not go down as we expect, but rather maintain it or increase.
I mean, Winston, hard question. Should government cut the amount they have allocated to the IPER, the Infrastructure for Poverty Eradication Program? 1.2 billion is a lot of money.
It's a lot of money, Evans, but you also need to ask yourself, what are the projects under the Infrastructure for Poverty Eradication projects? What are the programs in there? And government in itself, I mean, even before we got in under an IMF program, had indicated we're going to stay some of them and extend others. So for those that had already started, government said, look, we may not be able to pay this, and so we would stagger the payment a little bit and pay over a period of time. All of these things are ways towards, having savings. But this is where I disagree with Gideon. You want to construct 111 hospitals. Of course, the books would tell you that when you export jobs, so when a community exports jobs, you would have a boom in the in the provision of service, So that in itself would extend to being able to take care of the needs of the people. Let me break it down. So for instance, if we were to come to Kokomlemle and start a factory here, and you had people coming in to live at Kokomlemle, what would happen is that those who come to live here would demand certain services that could be provided by the indigenes of Kokomlemle. That in itself would help the indigenes of Kokomlemle to get some bit of money, and by extension, if their levels are low, it would raise them when it comes to their poverty levels. You get that point? But I say, under the current circumstance, where you find yourself, you need to choose between the devil and the deep blue sea and a hard place. I think it is better, and that's how we went. I didn't put this in the mouth of government. Government went and said, we're extending a program from 2022 to 2027. And I am saying that because of that, for areas that they've actually not started, areas where they have challenges with land, don't continue the search for land. Stop. Where it has started, continue. You get my point, Evans? Finish it. Where it hasn't started, do not continue. Because as it stands now, we don't have the funds. I don't see why we want to spend 27 billion, more than 100% increase in capital expenditure. I don't get it. I don't get it. Okay, you may want to make a case and say, no, we need to do a thing a year or two. Hold on a second. Check your goods and services budget. What are the things? And in the IMF program, we promised, for instance, that we're going to further check the statutory funds transfer. What can you do with them? You know, institutions that are on government subvention, how many of them can you get off government subvention? Let them stand on their own, let them move on their own and make savings to the state. These are not normal times. And when you find yourself in abnormal times, it means you must look at the policies that you go through. If we all agree that we are in trying moments, then we must all agree that a lot of things must give way. And enough of the sloganeering. We cannot continue with Agenda 111. We cannot continue with district warehouses. I mean, which country really? Look, in other parts of the world, we have incentivized people to provide some of these infrastructure. Why can't we do same here? So why is it always difficult for us that we want government to be at the forefront of doing everything? And a lot of these things is because of the procurement benefits associated with it.
Yeah, I mean, really, if you scrutinize some of the flagship programs, particularly one district, one warehouse, you're building a warehouse. A warehouse is only useful when there's something to put in there. And the warehouses were being built for the purposes of agriculture. You produce a lot, then you can put a bit there and store it for future purposes and export it, etc. But you live in a country where food inflation is skyrocketing. That tells you that the Plan for Food and Jobs, which was supposed to be the catalyst, you produce a lot using that, and then that, because the conversation has been in the past, farmers produce, and the produce, they get rotting. If you don't find a market for it immediately, a lot of it is perishable, stuff like that, then they perish. So you build a warehouse, or you put them in. And we have the situation with the food buffer stock, for example, that will be supervising this across the country. But we haven't been successful in producing a lot in this country, right? Even with all the money we spend with the Plan for Food and Jobs. So why are you building the warehouses in every district, by the way? Is it every district where they have agricultural output enough to make a warehouse a useful investment? Because it will not be useful if there's nothing to keep in that warehouse. It'll be empty, right? So must you have a warehouse in every district? Because the sloganeering is key. If you say one district, one warehouse, what it means is simple. In simple mathematical terms, one warehouse in 216 districts across the country. Do we need all that at a time of economic crisis? Thankfully, they've told the IMF that they will review it, right? I'm expecting to see a radical overhaul, not a review. Seriously, I mean, do we need is that a priority right now? Because if you build a warehouse, how long is it going to take? How much is it going to cost us? One village, one dam. Jojo went up. We've been playing that documentary over the period and found evidence that a lot of the dams that we built unfunctional. We spent a lot of money in there, an average of 250,000 cedis per dam, and the dams aren't working. So a lot of money we've thrown into a basket and had leaked out. Should you continue with that, or do you stop?
Look, I'm going to make
repurpose.
I'm going to make a point, and I know that Gideon may disagree with me, but this is the point. When we decided to reduce, and I mean we've reversed that now, the benchmark, reduction. When we decided to do that, at the time when the Vice President announced it at the College of Physicians and Surgeons, he made a very important point. He said that, look, we're doing this because over the period we've realized that because of our high import duty, people are smuggling in goods, and that is affecting even revenue generation. And people have seen other ports as ports of choice compared to our ports. Okay. Now, today, if you're purchasing a vehicle that hitherto you were paying duties about 5,000, 6,000, you have to pay duty of 26,000, 25,000. The reality is that if you could import 3, you would import 1, or choose not to import at all. So we're talking about food inflation, okay? We've talked about imported inflation. What does that tell you? Why is imported inflation the problem today?
Because we're not producing enough locally to feed ourselves. So we're having to import a lot of food.
And why is it? And so why is it that? And so if you cannot produce enough locally, what you do actually is that in the short term, if you want to get your inflation right, you actually begin to think about areas where you can reduce duty. The staple foods that are consumed most in your country. Think about it. Okay, look, inflation is troubling us. We've increased policy rate. It's hurting businesses. It's hurting businesses. Today, I mean, but for the banks deciding to even undergo loan promotions, you're having loans in excess of 35% in lending rates. That is on the high side. And every business that takes an interest rate of 35%, you think he would reduce that for you. So how about you telling yourself this, that, okay, and Kenya did it. Kenya, in the heat of COVID-19 and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as we've said, are our problem. What Kenya did was to say that, okay, because we consume a lot of rice and we don't produce enough, we're removing some duties on rice importation, so that it would reduce the cost of rice on the market. It reduces the cost. Yes, I mean, you're not going to get the kind of revenue you think you may get because of the duty you've imposed on it. But if your market, and I know the rice producers in Ghana are going to jump and say, why do you want to do that? The reality is that today, we cannot produce enough. The reality is that today, even those who are producing here, our own rice producers are charging us more. In some instances, they're charging more than the ones we import and bring into the country. So why don't we say, for instance, for only a year, we want to do this? Let's say it's not even rice. Check the other things that are in high demand in the country that you can actually reduce import duties on. Look, it is not everything that you have to say, oh, because we need money, that's there. Because if at the end of the day, didn't you hear the people complaining that the ports had become empty? You heard it, Gideon.
Yes.
You heard it, Evans, that the ports had become empty. What do you do to bring some business there? Of course, because of the depreciation of the Ghana cedi, and because our import duties are calculated using, dollars, and so if you're bringing something into the country, they will look at the, dollar rate of it, dollar price of it, and calculate your import duty for you. They may be, meeting targets because today the city has depreciated. But the question is, how long can we continue? A lot of things must change. Let's think about creative ways of doing things. But because if we want to go the same way, and I was having conversations with Professor Noel Tego. I mean, he's a celebrated professional globally when it comes to that practice of accounting. He's celebrated worldwide. He makes the point that you cannot do this, and it's about time we considered all of these. I'm hoping to see some drastic measures from the finance minister.
To continue from where he left off, I think there is a much broader argument or discussion we can have about this. We are looking at the revenue and expenditure rights, but then some of the things which will resolve a lot of these issues are major structural issues which are yet to be addressed. Everybody agrees for the fact that we have to be producing more, agriculture, manufacturing, etc. And these are the areas where, when we focus on, it leads to employment, it leads to value chain along the line. Unfortunately, a lot of the growth that we've seen over the past couple of years have been coming from the extractive sector. And the extractive sector has not really been employing as many people as much as possible.
Because it's highly skilled.
It's highly skilled, a lot of technology.
We don't have
and it's not going to change.
Yeah.
As the technology develops and increases, a lot of the production in the extractive sector is going to be run by technology or tech people. So we have to look at areas where we think that when we focus on, will increase productivity, at the same time lead to employing a lot more of our population than we are doing now. So for us now, coming to the finance minister, or what is to be read today, monetary theory is in the hands of the central bank. They are handling interest rates, etc. But government on its own can only do its work through expenditure and then tackling revenue. So if revenue, we're able to see that, well, based on the target that they set or they give to the IMF, they are bang on, fine. If they are ahead of target, even better. If not, then the expenditure or areas have to be really looked at in terms of making sure that they're not going beyond the deficit target they give to the IMF and so on and so forth. So it's not a straightforward answer, but I'll look for more direction or more of how the economy has fared over this past couple of months, which will give us an inkling is what's going to happen the rest.
Let's expand this to the very controversial area of still, again, meeting our revenue and expenditure targets as dictated by the IMF. We've talked a lot about taxes or no taxes, cutting or no cutting. One of the things they also committed to do is to touch workers and their wages. Just to quote, just for the avoidance of doubt, they committed, and it's in the program, wages of public sector workers will be calibrated. And I remember when this word came up, the TUC everybody was wondering, when you say calibrated, what exactly are you talking about? I'm expecting, and this is me also talking as a worker, right? Because what the workers get sometimes has an indication, or even the private sector, right? Because if the workers, they increase or reduce, then you go to an argument and say, but if the base pay had gone up for them, then there should be a knock-on effect for you as well. Calibrate to ensure a balance between burden sharing, productivity, and capacity to pay. Winston, you remember this quote?
I remember it very well.
This is the moment we get absolute clarity on what this means in reality.
Evans, you're right, but you see, this is our program, and before this program came out, government had already, accepted, labor's demands. You see, because we're faced with a shutdown, and we said, and then the whole conversation about inflation, and they started by asking for, an increase in their base pay, more than even the rate of inflation. Eventually, we agreed about 30% or so, thereabout. But then, going forward, is something government is not going to do. Something government cannot do.
Cannot do what?
Government cannot continue increasing, salaries the way labor would expect. Let's be frank here. And so you're right. You want to really hear what the finance minister is going to say. But that's also dependent on the conditions in the country. You see, if the conditions in the country demand increase in wages, you have to increase the wages. Look, the conditions today are such that you have fuel prices, we're told, going to go up. Okay? Now, if fuel prices are going to go up, you and I, seated here, we buy fuel and drive to work.
True.
If you buy fuel and drive to work, and over the period they've not increased your fuel allowance, what do? You have to pay for more. What that means when fuel prices would go up, and we'll not believe at this point, we know how the cascading effect it has on everything in this country. So then Labour would come back again and say, give us money. But there's a way government may play around this. They started by talking about how they're not going to increase, political appointees' salary here and there. There's also a way government may actually, so they remove the COLA and then they give, a certain increase. So that in itself, you realize that the total impact on the budget may not be as huge as you would expect it to be.
Yeah.
Now, there are people who are going to be going on retirement, who are going to be retiring. Is government really going to be employing people to fill up, or may want to, find others to get in there and say that's the end of it? Well, ordinarily, when you talk about a freeze on employment, you expect that once somebody retires, you replace that person. But if you have labor engaging in this kind of holding government to increase my salary, if you're the government, the best thing to do is also to watch. If you realize that, look, labor, there are people who are going on retirement. If I cannot pay, what do? I just would nicely say that, how about we get somebody to assume a responsibility here, so we probably do not employ another person to take it. We've also seen that today, government is beginning to export Ghanaian workers to other parts of the world and taking even money for it. That in itself saves government the usual stress of financial clearance to employ people, particularly teachers, nurses, doctors.
Yeah. Your thoughts on this? Because when the government had said to the IMF, and has been written in our program, that you're going to calibrate workers' wages for ensure a balance in productivity, burden sharing, and capacity to pay. Of course, we'll see what the reality is in the media budget. But what's your understanding of what this is and how that may reflect in actuals once we see it?
So this is also one of the areas where there's been a lot of discussions about in the past about increasing productivity of workers. And for me, I see a lot more of the government slowing down on employment or making sure that they don't increase their payroll costs. And then also to make sure that a certain level of productivity is brought about for government workers. As to the specifics, I haven't seen, and I'll wait to see it. But it will be interesting to see what they're going to do about this differently from what has been done in the past.
Yeah, and that for me, this is going to be one of the most controversial areas. So what they have committed to do something about it, But how that reflects in reality is interesting. And if you read further, Winston, another thing they said, as far as this is concerned, is that there will be a compression of real public sector wages.
Yeah.
Just to put it in context, what they committed to do was a primary expenditure will be reduced by 2% of GDP. Remember that target?
Yeah.
And to achieve this, one of the things they've committed to do to achieve this 2% of GDP expenditure reduction is compression of real public sector wages. What does that mean for you? You're going to compress real public sector wages.
So if we're having a discussion the other day, and the thing is, if you look at it, inflation itself is a tax on its own. And if you try to compare it, the government could say, well, the purchasing power of employees in general has gone down significantly. Looking at inflation from last year up till now, it's been over 40%. Putting all of this together, the real wages of employees in the sector has already gone down. I wouldn't expect that there should be any further compression. Inflation is...
But they've committed. They have a target. They have a target to reduce primary expenditure by 2% of GDP, and they've committed to the IMF to achieve this target will compress public sector wages. I'll come to you. You don't expect that they can do this? Or they should do it?
I don't expect any active measures to
compress.
Yes, because looking at how the CD has fared and inflation and everything, I expect there to be some balancing over this overall, so that when we do the comparing itself,
but considering that they've already agreed with the IMF to do this, it was on the basis of this and others that we got the deal.
Yes, so as I'm saying, it will be interesting to see the figures that he will present today and seeing whether the significant shifts in government's its own payroll against the revenue, etc., would have led to this payment.
And you see, the thing is that, yes, government was looking at ways that it could achieve the target it set for itself. But what could happen is that all these measures are supposed to end in one basket. Make sure that you're able to become, sound. So if government is willing to do other things, there'll be challenges here and there. Workers would fight, but government can actually decide to cut elsewhere. And in accounting, there are times that we've done environment, we've gone to move expenditure from one place, put it to another place because there's a problem here or there. But this is the point. If it becomes critical that other sectors suffer, just to make sure that we achieve that, and revenue cuts elsewhere would help the finance minister to do that, he would find ways and means to do that. But this is the point. You also would realize that going forward, and I'm sure when it comes, he will say, but I foresee a situation where going forward, we may have to reduce the numbers, even when people are going on retirement. I foresee the situation where we may not be replacing them, unless it's very critical to replace them. Because if we're replacing them, we may not be replacing them because of the way Labour is behaving. And look, 2024 is an election year, and Labour would never go to sleep. They say strike it when the iron is hot. They would put a lot of pressure on government to do a lot of things for them. And the government will look at other areas. You wait and see. The government may not touch this, and those who have implemented IMF programs will tell you that sometimes when you get it, then you begin to look for other avenues to actually, meet your targets. I foresee other areas suffering, but not, areas to do with the vulnerable, which in itself, I started by saying, is one of the avenues that the government could use to finance its election campaign. That's one of the avenues government could use to finance its election campaign. Because of the fact that this is also supposed to be a pro-poor, program, a lot of, the revenues would be hidden under pro-poor policies, like infrastructure for poverty eradication program. I don't know what that means. Okay, so you would have a situation where the finance minister, may not employ as much as people when they're even going on retirement. Even the critical sectors, they probably would say, we're able to deal with that. Because if you look at particularly our nurse to patient ratio, we have very good ones. We meet the world standards. Doctor is a problem, so that one you need to, but we'll tell you that, but over the period, that has always just been that. You look at areas, when it comes to even teachers, you look at areas where they can afford not to employ new ones. And there we go.
Yeah, that for me is one to watch, because Labour will tell you, anytime this has been mentioned, they say, what about the Article 71 office holders? What have you done about their salaries? And I noticed in the program to the IMF, the government actually told the IMF what they've done with that group of workers, that the 30% cut in their salaries. Remember that it was part of the document that the IMF themselves published as part of that program. Is that a sense that maybe the suggestion is that for that group of people, they've already sacrificed their 30%, and so their salaries and wages have been compressed already? Again, if you look at the spread, the bulk of the public sector, which we now know, it's the two biggest items always in the budget. That's been that, and on also what we spend on interest payments. The interest payments recently had overtaken the wages, obviously because of where we are. That clearly is going to be where the fight is going to be. How much is government itself willing to cut in terms of the political appointees, and how much then does he derive a fair bit of moral justification from there, and then say, because we've suffered this much, then you also share the burden. Remember what the wording of that is burden sharing, a balance between burden sharing and ability to pay. I foresee a situation, possibly the finance minister will want to go there, where we will stress what they've cut, and then invite workers to take a bit more hit looking into the next year. You don't see that as a possibility?
Well, that's a possibility, but workers, you see, the thing is that, Evans, and let's face it, once you're taking a hit, okay, and this is where the problem always is. The fact that today they see government, and so we're talking about, and I met a minister who showed me the last time and said my fuel coupons for the week is...
Okay, let me just...